Okay, so welcome to this session. My name's Dean. Before I get properly started, I just want to hand over to my moderator for this session, Mr. Ollie Trussell.
Hello there. Thank you very much, Dean. So my name is Ollie Trussell. I am a Google certified teacher. Like Dean, I met him at the Google Teacher Academy back in London in 2013. So Dean works as part of his role in the AET. It's an academy in the UK. So he is very well trained and versed in implementing Google and getting things right in order to do that. So hopefully we can all learn an awful lot from Dean today. On the moderator side of what we're doing, if you have any questions, you can just post them below the Google Education on Air website, and what we'll do at certain points when there's a few questions, we'll pose them to Dean. So do please put your questions there. Thanks.
Excellent, thanks, Ollie. So I just want to make a start by showing you this slide. It says, using Google Apps will save you and your school time and money whilst increasing productivity. There we go. But there is a bit of a caveat, and that is if you do it right. So what I'm hoping to do today is give you some practical ideas about how to do this. Maybe you're watching this because you're thinking about going Google, but you're not quite sure. Maybe you know the value that Google Apps would have in your school, but you're not sure where to start the journey. You might even have a dedicated group of you who know that moving to Google Apps will be great, but you're not just quite sure exactly who to see. Or you might have already moved all of your data over from your current system, but you're a bit overwhelmed by the amount of things that are on offer that you just don't know where to go next. Well, whatever situation you're in, that's fine. I'm hoping to give you a few ideas today that will help you with places to start, what to do next. But the biggest thing is that you just make that leap of faith. I want to help you make that jump to just do the big thing, make the change, and go to Google Apps. So I want to give you some context. My name is Dean Stokes. I'm a Google certified teacher and Google education trainer, and I work in a school called Maltings Academy, and I research, lead and develop the use of technology for learning through the academy. I'm really lucky to be able to go and visit other schools and train them on how to do the same thing too. Now we've got about 1,200 users of Google Apps through the academy, including all the students and every member of staff. We've got just under 1,000 students. Now, we went Google in September 2013, and I can genuinely say that it's the best thing that we've ever done as a school. I think in terms of the efficiency and the workflow improvements that we've seen, it's just been massive. A couple of months ago in March, we were graded outstanding by Ofsted after being requires improvement. If you're in the UK, you'll know what that means, but essentially that's a really, really big thing for us, and we're really, really proud. And I've no doubt that the efficiencies that we've made in the back end, especially with our office staff, using Google Docs for sharing has just made that so much easier. Now, Maltings is also part of a big trust called the AET, or the Academy's Enterprise Trust, and they have 68 academies across the whole country, and we share one Google domain actually, so we have lots of subdomains, but overall we're on one Google Apps account, and so we have over 55,000 users. I think we're something like the third biggest user of Google Apps as a trust in the UK, so it's a pretty big deal. Managing a domain of that size comes with its own challenges, but start small and then think big as you move on. Now, creating this presentation really made me think back to when we first moved everybody over to Google Apps. We were on a bit of a journey and it was quite fluid. We definitely made a few mistakes, and if you don't make mistakes when you do this, then there's something wrong. You know, it's a learning process. So although I didn't necessarily realize at the time, I guess there were 4 stages to what we did. The work that we did to migrate to Google came in these 4 different packages, and that's what I want to share with you today. So I've broken it down into these 4 areas. The first one is research. It's really important that you research exactly what you're going to do, and almost more importantly, why you're going to do it. Secondly, we planned it. Get a plan on paper or on screen. How exactly is it going to work? When are you going to run those training sessions? Is it going to be 1 a week? Are you going to start this on an inset day at the beginning of September? How are you going to do it? Then you need to present it. The leadership have got to be on board. That's so, so important. If they're not on board, then people aren't going to believe in it. So we're going to talk a bit more about that in detail later on. And then finally, the rollout. You've got to roll it out to everybody. Whether everybody for you is just your staff or just your students or literally everybody through your academy, you need to roll it out. That's the point that you need to get to. So although there are these 4 stages, we're aiming for that 4th one, and it's important as well not to spend too much time on any of the others. As I was saying, it's that leap of faith. If you never make that leap, we can stand around and talk about it all day. So let's start then with research. Now you may have seen a TED talk in the past from a guy called Simon Sinek, and he talks about starting with why. And it is really, really important to think about why you would make the jump to Google. Why would you migrate everything over to Google before you start? Now, for me, it's not just about why when you're doing the research, it's also about what. What exactly are you going to be doing? Now, most of you have already got email. You might be using Exchange, web access maybe, so that people can access it at home. So the why might already be done, because it's clear that you need email. So the simplest step is to move over to Gmail and get everybody using that. But let's think about the what. Now, with the what, you need to think about whether everybody's going to be given a Google account, why that might be the case. So there's some tools on screen there in the technical section. Would you use those? Would you sync it with your Active Directory? Would you have a single sign-on situation where the password is automatically changed? If it's changed in the school, it also changes on Google. Remember, even when you're thinking about what you're going to do, think about why you're going to make that choice. Why is it that you would want to sync all the information from the school? For you, that might not be the best thing to do. For us, it was, and that's the situation we have in place. If a student changes their password in the school for their school login, it also changes their Google password. Their username is exactly the same for both systems. It makes things very, very simple. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, but the single sign-on for me, I do think, is key. We use other apps and sites, Show My Homework, for example, and students just click the Login with Google button, and that's it, they're in. They don't have to worry about another username. They don't have to worry about another password. They just click the button, and they're in. It's really, really simple, so there's nothing else to worry about. So the second thing in research, then, is you're going to want to do some research around the school to find out how people work. Now, you've probably got a good knowledge of your own workflow, but how are other teachers managing the resources with students? How do your admin or support teams collect information, for example, from the staff? Are your shared areas used consistently around the school by every department? Maybe there's one standout department that does it really well. Are they going to be the ones that you need to convince a little bit more? Do your research, and once you've gathered all that information, mind map some thoughts about how Google Apps might improve those workflows. Now, for some, maybe they won't. There isn't an answer for everything, and please don't use technology for the sake of it. There's such an easy trap to fall into. Don't get all these things and think, right, there must be a way to Googleize it, as it were, because there not necessarily is. But I'll give you an example. So when we did this, I realized that our support team were creating forms in Word, even just for simple things like orders on open evening, a food order. When staff stay late on an open evening, they get free food. So they would have this simple form in a Word document, but the problem is they would email that as an attachment to everybody. And when people got it, they'd open it up in Word, fill it out, save it, attach it back to an email, and then email it back. And then one poor person in the office has to sit and collate all of that information from all of those different Word documents into a spreadsheet. Now, if you've ever used Google Forms, you'll realize that's a huge waste of time. And if you were lucky enough to go to Ollie's session earlier, you would see that there as well. Now, I'll come back to this story a bit later, but one thing I would say right now is don't underestimate the power of your admin or support team, whatever you might call them in your school. Because although the change from leadership is really important and they must lead you through it, they must be the people that are stood saying, yes, this is a great idea, change can bubble up from the bottom as well. And when the admin team start sending out Google Forms or they start sharing documents or sheets, everybody is going to want a slice of that good pie. And it's clearly important to have your leadership on board. But remember, change can also bubble up from the bottom. That's key. So once you've thought about what you're going to do and why you're going to do it, you've done your research, you need to move on to your planning. So firstly, you need to think about the logistics. Are you going to migrate all of your email from your current system into Gmail? Maybe you're just going to migrate the staff emails to save some space from the students. Don't forget there's unlimited space in Gmail. So which are you going to set up first? Would it be the staff? Would it be the students? These are some really important some really important things that you need to make sure are in place before you get to the rollout stage. And it's definitely important to plan some time for testing. Now, I'm not the only one that thinks that. I put a post out on Google Plus to ask for some thoughts from the community. And Afzal Sheikh, who's a fellow Google certified teacher who went to the Google Teacher Academy with myself and Ollie, He says always roll out in stages. Maybe have people trial it, some admin or teaching staff, up to a year before the rollout. Now, I do agree that some trial is really important. Don't be the sole person that's used these Google tools and see the great things they could do. I'm not sure if I would do it a whole year before. Definitely give them a bit of time, but you want that change to happen fairly swiftly, but without rushing. Now, after that, you need to think about your training. You're going to need to put a schedule together. So I'll go into more detail about the exact types of training you might do in the rollout stage, but this is how our plan worked. On the first day, when we went back in September, it was an inset day, and we set up a room that had different stations, a bit like a carousel lesson if you've ever done anything like that. And each station had a specific job. Staff had to visit the room at some point, just through the day, just for 5 minutes, and what happened was we had them change their password at one station so that it'd sync across to Google. Then they were shown how to log in, and then just some basics in Gmail, just real basic things. How do they check their email? How do they reply? We made it really quick on purpose. This was just the first sort of interaction they were going to get with the Google tool. So people could stay longer if they wanted, if they had questions to ask or they wanted a bit more detail, that was fine. But we just wanted to give them a feel that some sort of change was happening. The other key thing then in the training is to practice what you're going to do. You want it to be perfect, especially at the start. If it all goes wrong in that first training session, then it's going to be a nightmare because everybody will look at it and say, no, it's rubbish, I'm not going to try because that's what's going to happen in my lesson. And it's also really important to practice the technical elements of your presentation that you're going to do to the leadership team. That's probably the most important presentation that you're going to do in the whole process. You need to make sure you're prepared for any questions they might ask. Without a doubt, you'll get security questions. If you're based in the UK, in the session materials, which you can access by going back to the information about this session, you'll see that I've put a link to the DFE Cloud Services Checklist. On that sheet as well is a link to all of the different tools I talked about in the research stage. But that Cloud Services Checklist from the Department for Education essentially gives the green light for a school to use Google Apps. The data is secure, there's no question about it. The Cabinet Office in government use it, for example, in the UK. The White House use it in America. So if they can use it, I'm pretty sure it's going to be okay for your school. But if your senior team need assurance, then that's a perfect document to give them. Okay, so we've done our research and we've done the planning. We've found all these ideas. We've thought about how we might change the workflow using Google tools, and then we've planned it out and mind mapped it. Really, really simple. They're the two first things we're going to do. Next up then is one of the most important parts. We need to get the most important team in the school on board, and that's the senior leadership team. So just think back for a moment. When you first saw real-time editing in Google Docs, do you remember that feeling? Now, I've been lucky enough to go to a number of schools and do training on Google Drive where people have seen it for the first time. And I've been lucky enough to see that reaction where that light turns on in someone's brain and then they start thinking about all these different ideas that they'll be able to do in real time with Google Docs, with students and with other staff as well. That feeling, that is the feeling that you want your senior leadership team to feel as well. So showing your leadership team is probably the most important step. They need to see the tools are going to add value to the school, and they don't want to waste anybody's time. It might be helpful to have someone with you at this point. Now, it sounds like a lot of pressure, but the best thing is that the technology is there and it does just work. You know that because you've used it. It's just about replicating that moment. Give them that feeling that as a leadership team, especially if they don't teach, they probably don't get it a lot anymore, but that feeling where they see something that they know is so good for the school. They can imagine teaching in a lesson where students are doing this and students are enjoying it. Just get them logged in and share a document with them. Now this is also the point where you're going to draw on all those points that you came up with in your research. So where could the workflows be improved? Technically, how will this work? How will it improve the efficiency across the school? Have other teachers seen it? Do they like it? They're the things that you need to have ready. That's exactly why you did that research and that planning. When you're in that meeting, they're the things you're going to talk through with your leadership team. Now, above all, it's on the second line there, be confident. You know it's good. If you've used Google Apps and you've used Docs, or you've created a presentation and worked on it with somebody together, you know how good it is. So just be confident that you know the ability these tools could have to help improve your school and improve the efficiency and productivity. They will see how good it is when you show it to them. So stay focused on the key points. Going Google will save time and improve productivity. And I'm not the only one that thinks so. Mark House from Google Plus, another Google certified teacher, said, get the leadership on board. They need to walk and talk the project. They really, really do. They are the most important. But don't forget what I said earlier. Change can also bubble up from the bottom. If you've got that support team, the ones that are emailing documents to staff on a day-to-day basis, or that are creating letters that go home, they're just as important, and the change can bubble up from them. When they start creating those documents, people think, oh, it's a Google document. How do I do that? Oh, by the way, you can access it at home on any device. So we've done the 3 steps so far. We've done your research. You've thought about how it's going to change the school. You've done the planning. You've got it down on paper, and you've mind mapped exactly what's going to go where. How's the schedule for the training going to work? Is it going to be the first day and then later, maybe every week through the year? Probably a bit much if it is. And then you've presented to your senior team because you know it's such a good idea, you want them to do it, and they say yes. So then it comes to the rollout. Now this is a change that's going to happen over time. But here's where your research, your planning and hard works all come together. Remember what I said at the beginning? Using Google Apps will save you and your school time and money whilst increasing productivity if you do it right. But you have done it right because you've got everything in place. You've done that research, you've done your planning. So here's how we're going to approach it with staff then. Gmail first. Really, really important. Show them how to organize their emails. Maybe show them filters and undo send. That's in Labs, by the way, if you've never used it before. And all those cool features they've probably not used in their personal Gmail accounts, which most of them have probably got. So the whole thing's going to seem quite familiar. And that's a great thing when you're changing. If it's familiar, it doesn't feel like as big a step. It doesn't feel like another massive thing they're going to have to learn. So I'll give you an example. When we did this, we trained everybody on Gmail at the beginning of term. We ran our current system. We had Exchange at the time. And we ran that alongside Gmail for a week. That was the plan anyway. 2 days after we'd showed everybody Gmail, they'd logged in and they'd had to play around with it, we were getting emails. When are we going to switch over to the new system? Let's just do it. And so we did. 2 days later, we turned off the switch for Exchange, turned on the switch for Gmail, and it was seamless. Everybody's emails were still there because we'd migrated them over, because we'd planned it properly. But we actually just did it earlier because that's what people were essentially begging us for. So we did it. Now, that was the beginning of term. We then had 6 weeks until half term. And so on that final week, I did some training with different groups of staff. And one of the most important things I did was split them into ability groups. Beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Now, if you look at those session materials, I've put my description in just one sentence for each ability group. The reason for doing that is that people feel much more confident when they're surrounded by people of their own ability. Those beginners that are really worried that they're going to go in and be flooded by all this technical jargon aren't then as worried when they walk in and they see people at the same level. It's also important for you to have some other people there with you, especially that beginner group. They're going to be much more needy in the sense they're going to have more questions. They're going to need a little bit more help to log in. You're going to need to go a bit slower. So definitely have 1 or 2 other people there. Now, if you want some objectives for the training session, they're also in my session materials. Just 1 slide for each group. 1 slide for beginners, 1 for intermediate, and 1 for advanced. And if you look, they all look very similar. But the beginners still feel like they're doing just as much as the advanced group because they're still going to cover Gmail, they're still going to look at Drive, and they're still going to look at Calendar all in 1 session of an hour. And they'll walk out of it not having their brain fried, but thinking, wow, I can actually do this. And that is the feeling that you want, because you want them to go along in the future and make forms themselves, design spreadsheets, and share them with people. Now, I'm not the only one who thinks you should do Gmail first. Steve Clifford from the group on Google Plus also says, introduce Gmail first before even looking at Drive and sharing, etc. Get that right, and everything else will follow. I really, really agree with him. If people use email, that's your leg in. Everyone has to check their email, so they're already logging into their Google account. All you've got to do then is get them to click that Apps Launcher button in the top right, and then click on Drive and get them to have a play around with that. So get everybody on Gmail first, worry about the other stuff later, and leave it a while first. Let Gmail properly bed in before you start showing people all these other tools. So, your journey then has just started right now. I still hold training now, nearly 2 years on for staff, and I meet with people one-to-one all of the time. just for individual requirements or to show them other tools like Google Cultural Institute, Google My Maps, things like that. So this is a journey that you're just beginning, I would hope, if you're watching this presentation, but that will go on forever. It is never ending, but that's the great thing about it. When we started, you couldn't merge table cells in Google Docs, but you can now. And that's what I love about it. When we started, there wasn't Google Classroom, but there is now. And so there are all these ways to keep organized that are much quicker, much more efficient than even they were 2 years ago. And we already thought that we were becoming more efficient. So we've made even more gains as time's gone on. Above all, though, remember why you're doing it. You want your school to be more efficient. You want people in your school to be able to be more productive without wasting their time. You want to save people time. So remember earlier I talked about our support team and their forms where they emailed them out as a Word document. They came back, someone collects it into a spreadsheet. Well, now they create their own Google Forms for everything like that. And they've saved literally hours of work, if not days or weeks, every year through that one simple change. That one thing that they learned. Seeing Google Forms has essentially transformed the way that whole team works. They save hours and hours and hours. Now, recently we had a school visit to see how we're using Google Apps around our school, and I took them into the support team. There's a team of 4 ladies in our office, and someone asked them, they were talking about Google Forms, and someone said, so what did you do before you sent that form out by email as a Google form? What did you do before that? And they couldn't remember. And I think that is testament to how easy it is, because the way they're doing it now is just so ingrained, even though it's only been like it for a year and a half, as opposed to the 10, 15 years they were doing it the old way, that they can't even remember the old way that they did it, because it just seems like an insane, ridiculous way of working, doesn't it? So, to quickly recap, the 4 stages. Research what you'll do and why you're going to do it. Plan how it'll work, get it down on paper, do some mind maps. Think about the training schedule. Present to your leadership. Remember, you want to give them that moment, that one moment that you remember when you were first shown real-time collaboration in Google Docs. That's the key thing for me. Show them that, give them that feeling where they start sparking all these other ideas, and you can see the look on their face where they're thinking, wow, think of all these things we could do with the students. And then roll it out to everybody, whoever your everybody might be, all the staff, all the students, maybe even the whole school. And that's it. 4 simple steps to go in Google and being the person to lead it. Ollie.
Hey Dean, thank you very much. So yeah, we've had a few people. That's been fantastic. There's been about 30 people watching, and so there's been a few questions coming in from Thomas. If anyone's got any more questions, please put them in there, and I'll start posing them to you, Dean, if that's all right.
Okay.
So the first one really is Thomas said he has to keep Exchange running. Can you successfully run Google Apps for Education alongside Exchange?
Okay, so Ollie, I don't know what your experience is with this actually. Are you using Gmail now?
Yes, so our school, I could probably offer quite a bit here. We still run Exchange as our primary email domain. So we didn't start with Gmail, and we're all the students use Gmail, but getting staff onto it, it's not happened yet for a variety of reasons. But it hasn't really implemented or affected the rollout. I would say that if we were all using Gmail, it would make the whole thing a damn sight easier. But it is absolutely possible to roll it out alongside Exchange.
Yeah, I think I 100% agree with what you've just said. We were lucky to be in that position where we could make that change. And the reason I say go Gmail first is because if you've got that option, it's without a doubt the best thing to do, as Ollie just said. That is that first step in. Everybody checks their email. When you share a document, you get an email. Can it work without that? Yes. Because when an email is shared, so long as it goes back to that same email address, if you can configure the domain that way somehow, then that would be the best way to do it. So the answer is yes, but even more so, the research and planning is just even more important.
Perfect. Another question, how did you get old emails from Exchange to port across to your Gmail?
Okay, so on the first slide that I showed, the research slide, there are a few tools on there, and one of those is called GAME, and that's a Google Apps migration for Microsoft Exchange. And you run that, and that can pull all of the emails from your Exchange server and upload them to Google. Bear in mind that it's going to take a while. We've spent essentially 8 to 10 weeks uploading emails. pretty much solidly for all the staff emails. We chose not to migrate student emails. We did have a look at how many student emails there were. The numbers were much smaller than the staff emails. We figured that we still had the Exchange server running, so if a student needed an email, we could still get it, but it was just much easier only to migrate over the staff data. If you've got quotas in place on your Exchange accounts, then that will make it even easier because you're only going to be uploading a certain amount of data rather than an endless amount. All the links to those tools, though, are in the session materials, which are available. Clicking the link just as you see my session title.
Perfect, thank you very much. Another question, if a user base isn't dependent on email, where would you start?
If they're not dependent on email?
Yeah, so if I imagine if their staff don't use email that regularly, what would be your best second or second best app to start with, would you say?
Yeah, definitely Drive. The thing is that everybody is going to have an email address because that is their Google username. So they may not be dependent on email, but my guess is they're going to need an email address. If you can't give them a Gmail address, if you need to have Gmail turned off, which is a possibility, then definitely Drive. Sit a bunch of teachers in a room, and the only demo you really need to do to give them an idea of the power of what Google Apps can do, as I said earlier, is create a document and share it with them all, and let them all start typing. And you'll see their faces kind of light up. Ollie, you've probably seen this as well. Their faces kind of light up thinking about all the possibilities for this kind of thing in lessons. So definitely Drive would be my first go-to app if I didn't do Gmail first.
I would absolutely agree. Yeah, bang on. All right, I've got a couple of questions just for you. So
Okay.
you mentioned before about like the evolving ecosystem. So Google is obviously constantly evolving. How do you kind of help staff with this who may be not so technologically savvy? So essentially, what happens next after you've implemented? What's your next steps?
Yeah, okay. So Google changes at an insanely fast pace. I do wonder how Google employees even keep up with it at times. But I think the best thing to do is to try and get a bit of a team of staff who will help you keep an eye on things like the Google blogs, Google Plus posts from the official Google accounts, and don't bombard staff with the changes as they happen. Find out what it is that staff are looking for. Merge table cells is a great example. You could never merge table cells in a Google document, and that was one of the biggest things that I was asked for all the time. You'd have staff coming saying, "Oh, I'm trying to convert a table from a Word document, but it's not working," and they couldn't do it. When that was released, that's just one email to all staff. You can merge table cells now, and they could do it. I wouldn't necessarily put together huge emails with lots of different things that have been released. Lots of the things are actually quite small and people will find them themselves. More recently, some bigger ones that I've emailed staff about are Google Classroom allowing multiple teachers, because that's been a huge thing as well. You can only have one teacher per Google Classroom, now you can have multiple teachers. So I think it is just a case of keeping on top of the announcements from Google and deciding which are the most important to send to staff. Some smaller ones, I do email staff like separately, so either maybe a group of 3 or 4 people that I think are going to find something helpful, or maybe just an individual person, go and see them in person and show them a new thing that's happened. How do you do it, Ollie? What would be your
So
tips?
we have a Google site which is set up just with apps and updates. So I post a lot of updates and things on there, and staff know that they go on there. More recently, we've had a Google Classroom set up for for teachers, and so we'll post announcements in there, and they can come and check in. But I think you're right. You don't want to email every tiny little update because you would be doing it probably a few times a day, and they get very sick of the sight of your email address.
The Google site is a really nice idea. It's that thing of when you're emailing, you don't want people to stop opening your emails. There are people who send out too many emails, and then the default thing for people to do is just to put them in the bin or archive them. And you don't want to get to that point. You want every email you send out to be of worth, so that every time an email comes from you, people read it.
It's also worth maybe thinking about the demo slam idea at kind of staff meetings. So really short 2-minute snippets of new cool tools, just really quick wins that staff can take away.
Yeah, totally agree.
Cool. And do you find any departments or specific, let's say, age of staff take to it easier or less easy? Has anything surprised you?
We bought some Chromebooks last year. We bought 40 Chromebooks for the English department. And it's interesting because I think everybody thinks of the English department as a department that just will always use pen and paper, and that's how they have to write because they're going to write essays in their English exam. And they have taken to using the Chromebooks in their lessons like ducks to water. I have to give it to them. They've been absolutely amazing. That was a slight surprise in a sense because I really didn't know if they would be happy with the whole web-based thing. They have to use Google Docs, and then it's all kind of marked online. But actually, they've saved a load of money. They've stopped printing as much. All of their stuff is done using comments on the documents through Google Classroom, and so that's been a massive change. There will always be people that surprise you. There's generally, when you're working in a position like mine in a school, you do have an idea in your head of who you think will be able to do something and who you think is going to need a bit of support. But if you can sit next to somebody and help them with it, you'll be really surprised at what people can do. And I think the biggest thing for me is I never do stuff for people. I sit next to them whilst they do it and I talk them through it. So don't ever sort of grab their hand and do it for them. Sit next to them and just guide them through the process. Tell them to click on this. Okay, excellent. Right, now go down and click on this. Don't ever just do all the clicking for them because it's almost, they need to remember that kind of muscle memory in a way. They need to remember how they did it rather than just how you explained it to them. But yeah, there will always be surprises. The English one is probably the biggest one that stands out for me.
Nice.
Are there any for you, Ollie, any staff that you think of?
I think PE are unbelievably innovative. So I've found that they are probably the strongest department to adopt any new thing that I throw at them. Likewise, business studies. I find certain subjects tend to lend themselves slightly easier towards like the docs and the classroom stuff. So any kind of heavy coursework where they have to do a lot of writing and has to be assessed a lot of times plays really well to kind of Google Docs, which is good.
Yeah, I think another thing is don't forget about other sites that Google have, like Google Cultural Institute. That is such a an underused tool, in my opinion, in schools. There's some amazing things on there. You can go on a virtual field trip to a museum or go do Street View underwater at the Great Barrier Reef. Things like Build It with Chrome, which is a site where you can build Lego structures virtually online. You could use that to get groups of students to visualize something that they've created in a story, anything like that. So I think if a department ever comes to you and says, oh, well, I can't use Google Docs because we don't do a lot of writing, there's plenty of other stuff out there. It's not all just about Google Docs and Google Sheets. There's so much out there. My Maps is another huge thing now for geography. It used to be called Maps Engine, but creating different maps as well.
Yeah, I love My Maps. It's so powerful, particularly from an admin point of view. There's an awful lot of stuff you can do with your students' data, with postcodes and things like that. A quick loaded question, if you don't mind. So let's say if a school was trying to implement Google Apps for Education, someone like yourself, how important would you say your role is to someone who's there to kind of lead it from a pedagogical point of view?
Someone in my role, not particularly. I think anyone could do it. I think it just needs to be someone who comes up with that first idea and then maybe gathers a team around them. So although I'm in a role now where I do teach 10 hours a fortnight, which isn't much, but I'm in a role where I essentially just have to worry about training people and developing the use of technology. I wasn't in that role when we started, so that's kind of grown out of a need in effect, and now I'm lucky enough to go and visit other schools, the same as you, Ollie, to go and do the same thing, and I really love sharing good practice. But yeah, you don't need to be someone who doesn't teach. If anything, it's probably better to be someone who is teaching because you can have your toes in the water all the time, if you like. You know exactly what works in your lessons. You need to be able to talk to people and say, this is what works with a group of students and this is what doesn't. And somebody who doesn't teach, and that's why I make a real point of still having teaching time, somebody who doesn't teach can't do that. They might be able to reflect on what they did a few years ago or last time they were in a classroom or from seeing what other people are doing. But yeah, it's not important to have this role. It just needs somebody with some drive and motivation to realize that this is a really good thing to do and then push it through and share that kind of enthusiasm with the rest of the school.
Completely agree. Perfect answer. I kind of recommend, as Dean said, just getting a team of like a core people. We call them digital champions. So a core bunch of staff who can help you roll this out whole school as well. And yeah, I still teach more than Dean. But I think you've got to stay in the classroom to stay relevant.
Definitely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's it from the questions on our front. If there's any more, quickly pop them in there. But Dean, is there anything you want to finish up with?
No, I think this. So I've got a link to this deck in the session materials, and everything is going to be back on the Edge on Air website by about 10 o'clock UK time tonight. So if you want to come back and have a look, you can. And also, this video will be on YouTube or Google Plus. If you find me on Google Plus, it's posted up there already, and you'll be able to watch this back. Thanks very much, and thanks Ollie for moderating.
Thank you, Dean. Good session. Thank you.
See ya.